Hello, everyone, and thank you for your patience. We had some tech issues we needed to resolve, but thank you again for waiting. My name is Cynthia Wasco. I am the Foundation and Corporate Relations Manager for Habitat for Humanity here in Tucson, and also the moderator for our Courageous Conversations series. And today is our final session with that series. So thank you for joining us the past few sessions if you were here for those, and thank you for joining us today. As we've been doing, I am going to start with a land acknowledgement. Raise the Bar Consulting and the facilitators of the Courageous Conversations series respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we live and work on. We recognize the continuing connection of Indigenous peoples to their country, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Milton, and he will get us started.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've had some technical difficulties, and my partner in crime is not connected. He may be able to join us later, but we'll proceed in any event. Let me take the screen. Cynthia could give me screen control. Do I have that?
Yep, you just can go ahead and you are co-host, so you should have at the bottom, share screen.
Okay, let's go do that. Share telehealth, share screen. Okay. And we're going to, Chief, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Wow, just in time. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll do that again.
Yeah. I'm about to share, but we're live now. We've already started.
Right.
So we're going to share the computer sound and share. Okay, so everyone should have video of my presentation. Again, welcome. This is really designed to be a combo of kind of a fireside chat between Chief and I and the formal presentation. You will hear us referring to each other by our military rank. That's just a sign of respect that we have for each other. So don't get alarmed with that, please. So my name is Milton Ames. That's my contact information. I'm retired Air Force, 30 years of service. I've been in Tucson for 10 years, and I've had a series. My interaction with not-for-profits has been a few things. I did a workshop series called It's Your Money, It's Your State for a few not-for-profits a few years ago, where we did some financial literacy for donors and for the volunteers. Also been on the board of directors for Carondelet Foundation and Flying Samaritans, and a past deputy director of Right Flight locally. Chief?
Good afternoon. Again, I apologize for the delay. Again, my name is Clayton Moore. I was in the Air Force for 30 years. I did 30 years in 2 days, actually. And from there, I received an opportunity to join civil service right back on Davis Mountain Air Force Base for another 13 years, where I was a counselor for vocational, I was counselor for marriage, I was counselor for, and of course, finance. And I did that for about 13 years. Right now, I'm totally retired. I volunteer at my church, at Grace Temple Baptist Church. And so that's the biggest fun I have, as well as traveling when COVID will allow that again. But it's been a good road so far.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Now, the question is, why are we here? And we are here because of the history, really the history of this nation. So I want to start with an 8-minute video that's could be disturbing to some people. But what I'd like for the audience to do is to give me feedback through the chat box of you're feeling as you're watching this video. So let me see if I can get this started. And so that you can see it. Everyone see the video, I hope.
Not, oh, yes.
Okay, let's get it going.
But I can tell you one thing for certain. God was the first to cry. He was the first to cry for your boy.
Just happening again.
By the time Martin Luther King had come, the work had already been laid out. People have already paid a price. Folk were still being hung. And in this very present day, they're hanging men and women on trees just like they did 40, 50, 60, and 70 years ago.
Hate is a strong word. And for the last 12 months, we have seen it at its work. It's now being outspoken in our school camps. That's where it really hurts. Then our youth are being targeted, which means some of them will have some scars for the rest of their life. And that's not right. But there are still some who haven't grown up, who are living in the past and continue to preach and teach racial discrimination.
The world is all messed up. The nation is sick. Trouble is in the land, confusion all around.
I am a Muslim, and a Hindu, and a Christian, and a Jew, and so all of you, when you wave those flags and shout, you send fear into the hearts of your brothers.
But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars.
Here in America, our differences aren't supposed to matter. Here, we're promised equal protection under the law. Nothing complicated about that. That promise has not been realized, not even close.
This is where they fought the Battle of Gettysburg. 50,000 men died right here on this field, fighting the same fight that we're still fighting amongst ourselves today. This green field right here, painted red, bubbling with the blood of young boys, smoke and hot lead pouring right through their bodies. Listen to their souls, man. I killed my brother with malice in my heart. Hatred destroyed my family. You listen. You take a lesson from the dead. If we don't come together right now on this hollow ground, we too will be destroyed.
You know what I want to think of myself? As a human being. Because, I mean, I don't want to sound like, you know, as Confucius say, but under the sky, under the heaven, man, there is but one family. It just so happened, man, that people are different.
One of the foot soldiers was a woman who said she was 14 years old when she marched. She was so scared. The woman who is 111, she made her go through with the march because she said, if you walk away now, you'll let your fears guide you and rule you forever.
But the right to pursue happiness for so many is stripped away. It's raped. It's abused. It's taken by force, fraud, or coercion. It is sold for the momentary happiness of another. Now, this is about the time when I start talking about politics that the internet trolls tell me to stick to my day job So I'd like to talk about my day job. My day job is as the chairman and the co-founder of Thorn. We build software to fight human trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children. And that's our core mission. My other day job is that of the father of two, a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old. And as part of that job that I take very seriously, I believe that it is my effort to defend their right to pursue happiness and to ensure a society and government that defends it as well.
Which brings me to this. What I know for sure is that speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have. And I'm especially proud and inspired by all the women who have felt strong enough and empowered enough to speak up and share their personal stories. Each of us in this room are celebrated because of the stories that we tell. But it's not just a story affecting the entertainment industry. It's one that transcends any culture, geography, race, religion, politics, or workplace. So I want tonight to express gratitude to all the women who have endured years of abuse and assault because they, like my mother, had children to feed and bills to pay and dreams to pursue.
The president doesn't want us to march today. The courts don't want us to march. But we must march. We must stand up. We must make a massive demonstration of our moral certainty.
It's for the real organizers all over the country, the activists, the civil rights attorneys, the struggling parents, the families, the teachers, the students that are realizing that a system built to divide and impoverish and destroy us cannot stand if we do.
I will rise 1,000 times again, and we'll rise up. I like the waves will rise up. In spite of the ache, we'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again.
Okay, Cynthia, do you have any
Yes.
reaction?
We do, yeah. So
Okay.
I'm just going to read through them. Embarrassed that so much of these historical references are still repeated today. Someone said they believe the narrative, but know that many who don't. For example, thinking the BLM movement is a hate group or that it's funded by Democrat candidates. Hopeful that conversations like this one today and those conversations that I have and have had with my children will create a better future. Shocking that we as a society wait for someone famous to speak up or for a movie or documentary to come out before we too speak up or get involved. Powerful. It's about personal beliefs and institutional backed power. Overwhelming. The culture of domination and oppression is so painful for so many for so long. Scared and sickened that our current president wants this history suppressed.
Okay, that
Yeah.
gives us the gist of how it affects people. So
Yeah.
So the point is, why are we here? And this is where we are. We're at a point again in history where we have to say Black Lives Matter. And I like to add the tag to it to say as well, because many times we get the feedback that says, well, all lives matter. Well, all lives haven't always mattered. So the phrase Black Lives Matter really is valid because for over 400 years, people of color have been treated as if lives do not matter. And so here's just a quick read of a few examples. We've had slavery, beatings, hangings, castrations, separation of family. People have been treated as chattel. They've been denied property ownership, denied voting rights, strict travel, housing restrictions, unable to, been prohibited from reading and writing, denied education, been biased in the justice system, closed employment opportunities, restricted promotion opportunities, denied financial financing for housing or businesses, marriage prohibitions, police stalkings, beatings, and killings, and we've been omitted from the history books. So that really should say something about why the outcry is what it is today. But we have to think about, well, what are the long-term generational effects on a person that has been treated this way? Well, you tend to think that you have this victim mentality because the institutional system keeps you, quote, in your place. And it's a struggle to ever get out of poverty. So people over the years thought of themselves with self-pity, self-doubt, and a sense of helplessness, really. Now, on the other side, there's the term white privilege, and it's an emotional buzzword for a lot of people, I guess, on both sides. But what is it? I looked to the dictionary for a definition, and it says a societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people. So what are the long-term generational benefits on white people, this white privilege that they have? Well, it leads to a bias, an unconscious bias, sometimes conscious, and an ambiguous sense of patriotism. And certainly it leads to this white supremacy mindset because, you know, that is the way the nation was created, with the white supremacy mindset. So what do we want to talk about today? Chief and I are going to offer some anecdotes of our experience, primarily in the military, where we got most of our learning. And yes, the focus is leadership. So we're going to talk about leadership and the things that leaders need to consider when they're managing people of color. We're going to offer some suggestions and some tools that you might want to take and implement in your own organization. I'll leave you with a list of resources, and we'll talk about some takeaways for you. So first of all, some personal anecdotes. Chief, you want to kick this off?
Sure. I was born and raised in a little small town called Detroit, Michigan, some 70 years ago. And I lived on the east side of Detroit. And when I say lived on the east side of Detroit, I rarely, if ever, I could count the number of times I went to the west side of Detroit. When I finally left Detroit, Michigan in 1968, having spent my first 18, 19 years in Detroit, the longest trip that I ever took out of those 18 years out of Detroit, Michigan, was on that day that I went to the Air Force and I went to the airport. That was the longest trip I had in my life, from my home, not to San Antonio, but from my home to the airport. It's about 26 miles. That was the longest trip I ever took. And so the fact of entering the Air Force was somewhat daunting to me, because this was going to be very different. And when I say very different, it was at a very tough time in the history of our nation, where a lot of things that you saw in that video was transpiring. You may ask, coming from Detroit, did I experience the riots of 1968, 1967 actually, and part of 1968? Yes, because it happened around the corner. So I couldn't run away from it. But after entering the Air Force, I saw the opportunities that were there, but I also saw the racism that was abound, certainly in Detroit, and that I had experienced, that I heard about from my parents who were born and raised in Mississippi and came from Mississippi to Detroit to get away from all of those things that were happening in the South, only to find out they were happening in a smaller amount in Detroit. But coming in the military allowed me to do a lot of different things that I probably would not have done if I remained in Detroit. And one of those things, and many of the things that were offered by the military, and certainly the Air Force, was way far advanced, especially in the social area, than perhaps any other part of society. So I saw a lot of different things. I reacted to a certain number of things, but I also obviously became quite successful in the Air Force, but it didn't come without some battles. And I'll share that with you later on in the career path. Thank you, Colonel.
Okay, and so I was born in 1950 in rural Virginia. My mother was 17 years old when I was born. My father and my mother had a 5th and 7th grade education. In the community, my father was called colored boy, and the word colored was very common in the 50s and 60s. Also, I heard stories from my mother and my father about the lynchings that they witnessed when they grew up in town centers, around this little small community. So I grew up in segregated school system. I never had a white friend until I went to college. So my grade school was all segregated. My high school was all segregated. And it was when I went to Virginia Tech, all my classmates tried to convince me not to. But that was my first exposure outside of my little Virginia bubble, like Chief talks about his little 26-mile bubble that he finally got out of. And so I was a cadet. Of course, the Vietnam War was going on, so I joined ROTC. I was a cadet at Virginia Tech. So I mingled very closely, and I was the only Black person in my squadron, cadet squadron. And that experience was a great one for me, because now I started to recognize that all these stories that I'd been told about how inferior I was, and because that's what you get when you're being called colored boy, etc. I realized that, hey, I can compete with everybody here. It's not a big deal. I'm not the dumbest guy on this floor. So that was my experience. And I wanted the audience to hear our personal paths, so you have some idea of what it was like back then. The Chief and I have over 100 years of on the planet here, so we wanted to share that. But here, now, here's a question that you might ask: why do Blacks jubilantly celebrate so many first successes of other Blacks, such as the first Black airline pilot, or the first Black mayor, the first Black president? Why is that significant? Well, it's significant because our parents' parents never had any idea that a Black person can get outside of working in the fields or cleaning someone's house. So when we are able to move up the ladder, so to speak, parents rejoice with that. Peers rejoice when they see a successful Black person.
I'd like to add some, Colonel, if I could. This thirst has been going on for a very long time. And we often ask the question, when are we going to stop? That's a good question. But let me just take you back a couple of years about thirst. And when Joe Louis fought Schimmel back in the early 50s, late 40s, that happened not on a TV screen for Blacks, that happened on the radio. And there was almost riots because Blacks were so proud that they finally had a champion. They finally first had something that they could be proud of. And so this jubilance, if you will, continues today. And we're talking about over 60 years ago when they heard it on the radio. And now we're still talking about first here in the 21st century.
Yes, yes, we are, unfortunately. So let's go to the next slide here. So let's talk briefly about a career path. So yeah, I was at Virginia Tech, graduated. ROTC, well, before I graduated, ROTC I was in, as I said, and I was in Army ROTC initially until I met a Black officer that was in the Air Force program as an instructor there, military instructor. He convinced me to join the Air Force, and that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And in joining the Air Force, clearly Air Force wants pilots. So I qualified for the pilot program by taking a test. Now remember, so you had to do a test and then get flight training. So that qualifying test was to see if you had an aptitude for flying. Now remember, I come from a rural community. I've never been in an airplane before, but I struggled and I passed that written test. But the challenge really came when I had to get in an airplane and fly. So the Air Force, the Air Force provided a flight instructor at the local airport in Blacksburg, Virginia. And of course, he was a white guy. And as it turns out, he was a white guy, maybe a little bit younger than me, or I can't remember, maybe a couple of years older than I. But he didn't feel like I deserved to have that opportunity. So he did zero to help me in that process. So eventually I was washed out of that program, but luckily I was able to enter the Air Force as a navigator. And I became a navigator in the Air Force. Upon graduation, went off to Sacramento and got training, went to MacDill and got training in the F-4 fighter. And what I have to say is that was interesting was, as I walked around the base in my flight suit, people were staring at me, Black people and white people. And I couldn't figure out, what was going on. But eventually I did. The white people didn't think that, I was a rarity because there weren't hardly any Black people wearing a flight suit and flying Air Force jets at that time. This was 1970s, mid-1970s. And Black people were staring at me because they never thought that a Black person could become a second lieutenant. So I was always on pins and needles trying to be at my best. Hair was cut, shoes shine, all that to make a positive image. But the Air Force really leads the way, I think, in cultural change. And over the years in my career, I had several mentors who were white guys that helped me move up through the ranks in the military. I can remember two guys distinctly. One took me with him to the higher headquarters to work in the plans office. And then some 20 years later, another fellow brought me on, asked me to be his operations officer in the squadron. So those people really made an impression on me and made an opportunity for me to find out what the real Air Force was like and what the real world was like, and gave me an opportunity to lead people. Now, of course, I was a follower to begin with as a second lieutenant, but eventually through mentoring, I was able to become a leader in the military. Chief, you remember some of the programs we went through, social actions and?
Oh yes, oh yes, I really do. Because one of the unique things about the military is a constant training. You're training all the time. You're doing education all the time. And these words that you see on the screen, social actions and affirmative action, and TQM, total quality management, quotas, no quota, the quota system in the military only talks about how many people are going to be promoted in this career field, how many people in this career field. But without giving you a long ditty on my military career, I'll just point out a couple of unique things. The first unique thing is that when I came into the Air Force, I actually flunked the test, but they let me in anyway. And the reason they let me in, and this is a good story. The reason they let me in, because they had a program called, and I can't even think of the name now, but that Project 100,000 was the name. When I signed up, Project 100,000 was in being. What that meant was President Johnson said, I don't care whether they can read or write. I don't care as long as they can walk. Whatever they get on their test, if they got their teeth, if they can see and they can walk, get them in. So they let me in. And I will tell you, I did not know that I was dumb, if I was dumb, until 25 years later, when I looked at my records, when somebody was talking about Project 100,000, and I said, well, that sounds familiar. And I looked at my records, went back 25 years, and there it was on the first piece of paper was stamped Project 100,000. And what they were saying was that I was not smart enough to get in the Air Force, but we're gonna let you in anyway. And we're gonna teach you how to read and write. And we're gonna teach you like a good boy, and if you're good enough, you're gonna be able to make these 4 years. And bless God, I was able to stay 30 years because I was smarter than what they thought I was. And so part of that is the uniqueness of the military, and there are some carryovers to civilian society, and a lot of that is what you see. And I think one of the most important ones on there is mentors, mentors. And you don't have to be designated to be a mentor. When you're a good supervisor, when you're an excellent leader, you're going to get people to follow you. But when you're not a good leader, you're going to have trouble not only getting the job done, but you're going to have very few people that will model after you. Today, they select mentors, but in the old days, you picked your mentor, and it didn't matter whether they're black or white. The important thing is that you want to get that promotion, and you're going to have somebody on your side to move you up that ladder. And so we're going to talk more about how important these things are on the civilian side. And hopefully we didn't bore you with the military, but it's important to make that connection.
Okay, then Chief, let's turn to the subject of leadership.
Hey, Milton.
Yes.
Milton, before we move forward, there was a question that I wanted to pose to both of you.
Okay.
The question is, does it bother you when media refers to a person in the news by their race as the first adjective?
It doesn't bother me. It is noteworthy. It offers, some hope that a new opportunity or avenue has opened up. The world is progressing quite a bit, through my lifetime. So even though we're at the Black Lives Matter point, and it seems like we're fighting battles, the same battles that we fought 30 years ago, opportunities opening up because those constraints that we had, not being able to go to college or get a decent education or live in certain neighborhoods or get loans, we're able to now progress as a people. And because of that, yes, there are going to be some firsts to be followed by many, many, many others. We're headed in that direction.
Right.
Does it bother you,
I'll
Chief?
second that. No, it doesn't bother me at all. I clap my hands quite often when I see it because it's important. It's important to my kids that they see that. That we're moving forward and that we're not going through some of the things that I went through.
Exactly.
So it doesn't bother me at all. And in fact, we just had an Air Force general, the first Black Air Force general in the Air Force about 2 months ago. Is it significant? Yes and no. It shows that we're moving, and we're moving in the right direction. So at some point in our history, we're going to be able to say, I knew that general, instead of that general is Black and he's the first one.
Yeah,
And
the first
because-
chief of staff of the Air Force, right?
First chief of staff of the Air Force.
Right.
So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, and it makes us proud to see that, because you don't get to those levels by being a dummy. So you have to stand out, you have to work hard, and we know that he was a follower at some point and eventually became a leader. And leadership's what we want to talk about next. Were there any other questions, Cynthia?
No, that was the only one so far.
Okay, so let's open the poll then
All right.
with these leadership questions for audience participation.
Everyone should see a poll question in front of them, a little pop-up. All right, I'm going to wait till about 50% have answered. Okay, so here are the results.
Looks good. Everybody got it. Okay, so that looks good. All of the above, and it is, yes. So the leader does have to set the example and the tone, solicit progress towards a common goal, and grow the individuals that work for him, and him or her. And of course, we are in our business as leaders, we also have physical capital as well as human capital to deal with. Now, let's go to what is leadership? Is it a function or is it a title, Chief?
It's not just a title, it's a function. It's an important part of getting a result, a positive result, whether it be an organization of 1 or 2 or hundreds, or like a Raytheon with 12,000. Leadership is a function of management, in fact, and that allows us to accomplish a task.
So you need followers, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. That leads me to the real task of the Air Force. And we talk a lot about the Air Force now, and I hope no one's getting bored with that. But these characteristics and points that we're making does carry over into your not-for-profit world, because you're dealing with human beings. And I think what we can learn from the way Air Force does things will make our organization on a not-for-profit a much better entity. So the Air Force, and this was a quote recent quote from an Air Force general, and he says, we take people from anywhere in our country, from any racial background, from any economic background, and give opportunity to work hard and move out and become the best person they can be. And you can see that very plainly when the Air Force takes people from high schools and colleges all around the country and makes them pilots, navigators, crew chiefs, you know, it takes them out of this little cocoon that they've been in, this 20, 30 mile radius that they've grown up in, and allowed them to be a creature of the world. Here's another definition of leadership by Rear Admiral Grace Hooper. She says, you manage things and you lead people. That's her difference between manager and leader. I like what Jack Welch says. He says, before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself, which is quite true. And being a follower is part of that. And he says, when you become a leader, success is all about growing others. Now, so what does that mean to us? My definition, I think, of a leader is that you lead people, because you do have to interact with people, in order to manage the outcome. The outcome is the mission. In the Air Force, we have a mission. Everyone understands that mission. In your not-for-profit, you have a mission. Everyone that works in that organization should understand the mission. And it's the leader's responsibility to make sure that that understanding actually happens. Now, but a leader has to know himself, herself first. Leaders, managers, and supervisors have to be good in their own skin and understand really what makes them tick and how they should or should not operate to get the job done. You can't do it alone, and you have to solicit followers. Knowing how to do that is quite important. Would you say, Chief?
Absolutely. When we start working on certain things, one of the primary things that we need to work on is us. You know, how do I relate? What is it that I've learned over the years that I can use to become a better leader? And how can I do that by making myself totally whole? But part of that is you know, knowing yourself and how to interact with other people, how to speak to people, and more especially, how to listen to people. Because listeners, real listeners, can get a lot more done than talkers. So if you watch people, you'll watch people how they manage and how they lead others. You'll find that those successful leaders are the ones that learn how to listen. My dad used to have a saying, and I didn't understand what he really meant till I got older, 19. He said, boy, you can't hear with your mouth open. And so if you're talking, and this runs the gamut, whether you're leading, you know, people, or you're in a marriage or in a relationship, it's going to be a heck of a lot better if you learn to keep your mouth shut and keep your ears open. And that's part of knowing yourself first.
Yep. And so along with that, you know, you're managing people. What do people want? What does the leader want? What does the workers want? What do all human beings want? Has anybody ever heard of Maslow's theory? You know, he came up with this in the early 1900s, and he talks about what a person needs. And he puts it in a hierarchical form here. You need physiological things as a basic need, and you want to be safe and secure. Then you move to, once you have those, then you strive for belonging and love and self-esteem. And at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization. Now I kind of turn this on the side and look at it as linear, because from birth to death, I think you expect to go through this process. At least most people do. Now, what happens though when you hold a group of people back? When you don't allow them to read or write? When you just give them minimum of food and shelter? When you don't allow them to go to school and get a formal education? Well, that's the group that stays in that lower rung. They might get the basic needs, but they'll never get necessarily the psychological needs attended to. So this is what we have to understand when we are dealing with ourselves and with people, is that we want to manage people. They are a resource, but we have to engage them intelligently. And intelligently is part of that is knowing where everybody should be wanting to go on this linear or hierarchical spectrum. So, you know, what's important to you is probably as important to the next person, no matter what his or her skin color is. So as a leader, it's your job to engage people and engage them where they are. You have to select, monitor, evaluate, and groom. Those are all tasks for you as a leader to put into effect and grow the person that is working for you. Now, Chief, did you have a comment on this?
Yes, and this is a cyclical item here. This happens over and over and over again when we're dealing with people. We monitor them, and evaluate them, and we groom them, and then we go back and evaluate whether or not we groomed them, and then we go back and evaluate whether or not we monitored them, and then we select them, and the process goes on over and over again. So the engagement piece of dealing with people is very important. And I suspect that a lot of times there are, and we don't know ourselves well, we don't understand ourselves well, then we'll look at someone that talks different than we do, we'll evaluate them differently. When they are still wanting the same things on that Maslow hierarchy, they're still wanting those same things. And so communicating exactly what it is you want, but even on the other hand, give the individual an opportunity to tell you what they want on that scale. That's perhaps the most important part of evaluating and in grooming, is to hear that person tell you where they want to go, as opposed to you always telling them what they should be doing.
It's a two-way street. So this let me pose this question then to the folks in the room that supervise other people. You have to ask the question, what life exposure does one bring to the workplace? When you select someone, you are maybe looking at a resume, you've done some interviews, but you don't know their background, where they're coming from, what exposures they've had, whether they've gotten outside of that 26-mile radius of growing up, and you just don't know. But ask that same question of what exposure does one bring to the workplace if they are a person of color? Because if you are in the majority, a white person, you may not understand, or you can't assume that that person is coming with the same exposure to life and to worldly things that you have. I've told you about my background. Chief's told you about his background. You know, there's a segment of the population that, again, is in that lower rung, and they never got out of it. My parents never really got out of it. They worked for their entire life. So there's no idea of self-actualization for them. But this is a question that you have to pose for yourself when you're interacting with your peers or someone that works for you. And the next slide is just, I'm not going to go over everything, but it's just an illustration. Someone put this together to show how we think about things, depending upon where we come from or what class we are in. So if you're poverty class, you're going to think about money maybe a little different than the middle class or the wealthy, for sure. So this is just an illustration of how things are different and how we think differently. Now, here's a question for the audience, and you can just participate through chatting or unmute yourself. We're kind of behind time here, but let's ask the question: Does anyone? Ask yourself: Does my worker's ethnicity influence my method of communicating with him or her? Yes or no? That's for the audience. Anyone want to unmute themselves to speak to that?
We have a yes in the chat. Yes. These are coming through the chat.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I hope it's all in a positive way.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of yeses.
Because, you know, one method doesn't fit everyone, whether they're a different race or not. You have to understand, as a leader or manager, you have to be fit for the job. And part of that is understanding that there are different personality types. Not just the different backgrounds that I talked about earlier, but different personality types. And you have one of your own. You need to understand and know yourself first and be good in your own skin, and maybe take yourself through some self-assessment. Now, and then when you have people working for you, you need to try to understand, you know, what personality type they are, because then you definitely will need to change your method or your tone or your approach in order to get through and communicate with that person. I've highlighted a couple of things on this slide: the implicit bias test, which I took recently, and that gives you an idea of what your biases are as far as skin color or racial biases. So I'd suggest everyone take that test and do a self-assessment that way.
Let me add something here, Colonel.
Yeah.
If I could. There are a number of personality tests that you should take, not only to help you, but to help you deal and communicate with others. My good friend here, Greg Pleasant, is that's on the chat line here, is an expert in personality test called Colors. And it will definitely show you where you are when it comes to colors. And but it also talks to how you relate to other people by your color, whether it be orange or blue or whatever the case may be. But there's literally, I won't say hundreds, quite a few out there that you can even use in a team building exercise for your entire staff.
Yeah, excellent thought. So I'm not going to cover every bullet item on here. This presentation will be made available to everyone who wants it. But you know, you do have to be a follower before you become a leader, and you need to you know, think about collaboration with your peers, other leaders that are in your similar circumstances. You know, they're having probably the same problems, so collaborate with them.
Milton, we have a question. Milton, we have a question. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So someone said that it's a slippery slope to know how to communicate based on color and differences. And so how do you know when you should be adapting your communication style?
Well, I think part of it, I've told a story on previous sessions in this series of having, when I was a operations officer, I had my flight commanders, when they're doing their fitness report every 6 months, you sit down with your flight commander, and he's telling you about what you've accomplished and what he feels about it. And I always ask the flight commander to get information from the member and up-channel that. So it should be a two-way dialogue and not just a one-way direction of when you sit down and interview person. And it doesn't have to be in a fitness report situation, but just open dialogue, open-ended questions, asking for suggestions. Figure a way to get people to open up and share what they're feeling. And you're gonna learn a lot from that. At least we did. And one thing that happened in that scenario I talked about was we were able to give people feedback from above so that they knew that maybe they thought they were doing a great job, but the rest of this organization didn't think so. So they got that feedback as to how people felt about them. So you can't have thick skin. I mean, you got to have be open to ideas and not be rejecting criticism.
Okay, we have someone who wanted to make a, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'd just like to add, it goes back to that communication process. If somebody doesn't talk or you never engage them in a conversation, then you're probably going to know less about them than you would if you engage them in a conversation. And so just plain talking is going to open you up, is going to open that person up, and you get to know each other. And I think once you learn that person as opposed to the other person, as opposed to the other person, then you'll know how to lead and manage that person, because everybody's different. But the key is learning something about that person and genuinely wanting to know about that person. Big difference. So once you do that, I think you'll do well.
Melanie, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, I've worked in 7 foreign countries and of course in the US too, and I think that one of my biggest takeaways is to ensure that we are invoking what we call the platinum rule. Now we all know what the golden rule is, but the platinum rule is treat others as they wish to be treated, which is essentially what both Clayton and Milton have been saying in different ways. And I think getting to know people for who they are, being genuinely curious about them, is really the initial starting point as a supervisor, manager, leader, or colleague, friend, subordinate. Really doesn't matter, because we also, the question is also, how do we communicate with people, our superiors, for example? How do they want to be treated? And I think there's a very evident example in Milton and Clayton using their rank as a formality to address each other out of respect. So, they know that that's how they wish to be treated, and they're demonstrating that to us. I think the main issue here is not to make an assumption about how someone wants to be treated or how to communicate with them simply because of cultural identifiers that we may or may not know about them. And I think that, Chiron, is the real slippery slope, that we really need to get to know people first for who they are and understand what their preferences are to engage in appropriate communication that leans into them. Thank you.
I have one more point. An example for you, exactly what to Melanie's point. When I was stationed in Colorado Springs, I worked for a 3-star general. And, when you work for a general, you give him what he wants, But anyway, long story short, worked for him for about 3 years, and then luck would have it, he made 4-star general, and I made 3-star. I made 1 more strike. But I saw him about 10 years later in Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, and we ran up to each other and we hugged each other and started talking. And he says, "Well, Chief, how's Tammy?" And I'm thinking, I said, "Sir, I don't remember a Tammy. What's her last name?" And he says, "Your daughter." My daughter. Oh my God! I'm not thinking that he's going to remember my daughter, who at the time was 14 years old, that he was going to remember that. He remembered that because he remembered me. He took a personal liking to me and a personal interest because that's what a leader does. They remember you're important to them. Everything about you is important to that leader. That's what makes a good leader. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to chat about the symbiotic relationship?
Oh, okay.
Chief, while you're here before?
Yes. So symbiotic relationship only talks about the leader and how he or she leads one or more people. It's having a relationship that allows for the accomplishment of a particular item, goal, whatever the case may be. And it's called symbiosis when that is working, when that works. And it doesn't have to be the same. The outcome is what we're talking about in symbiotic relationships, the outcome. So you can have leaders that are different than the people that manage. You can have a person different over here, over there. That's important only to the outcome. All right, because even when in marriage, you look at marriage and you say, wow, I don't know how she's married to him, and I don't know how he's married to her, but the relationship works. That's because it's a symbiotic relationship. And so you want to have a symbiosis in your organization so that you're looking at the outcome and you're using the people to come to a successful conclusion to your mission.
Right. Okay, so let's move on. We've talked about this kind of roundabout, the feedback system. So all the members that all the entities that a not-for-profit would have to deal with, really you need to have and put into place these tools that we've just talked about and a couple that we will talk about amongst all these pieces. And we probably should have arrows going even across and above and connecting more than one-to-one, because you need to, as a leader, you need to generate these relationships and the symbiotic relationship that leads everybody to the desire. In the military, it's the mission. Everybody's on board with the mission. That's what you talk about. You also have personal and side relationships that really enhance and facilitate those. And you can have those with people of different cultures. And because that's what your community is, that's the demographics of your organization, that's what you should be working towards if you don't have a diverse board or staff or volunteers. But the feedback system is very important. Part of being successful as a leader. Move quickly into some tools. We just have a few minutes left here. Some things that work. I'm not going to go through all of these. This is a list of things you might consider. New people coming to the organization, you want to give them an orientation as to what the organization is all about, what the mission is. When I would go from base to base, I would always get an orientation as to the local customs, the mission, etc. Recognize that you can use committees to problem solve. You don't have to do it all yourself, but when you elicit your troops or your people that work for you to solve a problem that is a common problem, then they feel part of the mission. They feel part of the outcome. They feel like they belong. So that is also quite important. You, as a leader, also need to recognize that there are informal leaders within your organization, and you need to tap them so that they're working with you and not against you, because many of the folks in your organization look to them for that informal information. So just recognize that there are many tools that are formal as well as informal and people. I offer another tool here just because I stole some things from the Air Force. The Air Force is doing a diversity and inclusion task force from a high level. And I've changed those bullet points and listed them here. You can go over them at your leisure and change them from just strictly Air Force and military oriented to maybe more oriented to what the audience I have here today might be interested in. Also, a tool that you might use is have an audit, an internal audit, I'd say diversity and inclusion audit, where you bring in an outside advisor that can analyze what your procedures are, policies, your practices, and report that to the people in charge and make active recommendations. I've included here on this slide just a sample of what others are doing, and these hyperlinks really will send you to the page that shows what they're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. USAA, which is one of the most highly respected financial institutions in the world, has a myriad of videos that I think if you're going to start somewhere, that's a great place to start to get just a ton of information that you might use and implement in your organization. The next few slides are just some resources. I'll let you go through these on your own. Again, I borrowed them from the Air Force and listed them here. They're sorted by their subject. Here's leadership resources, race-specific resources, unconscious bias resources, general diversity and inclusion resources, change management resources. These are all books. And then on this page, I have some online inspirational resources that you might find very useful. The top few are from the military. What is the bottom three, I think, are ones maybe you should go to right away. The third from the bottom is on microaggression. If people want to stay around at the end, I'll run that one. I think it's very worthwhile. I talked about the implicit bias test that you can take. That's the hyperlink to that. And then this last one, TriVantage Point, is a company that provides training and sensitivity training through virtual reality devices. And it puts you in a scenario that you might be comfortable or uncomfortable in, but it's a learning opportunity to increase and enhance behavior when it comes to diversity. So takeaways. So lead people and manage outcomes. Everyone in the organization can be a leader in their own respect, but understand the principles that we've talked about that a leader has, and then recognize that everyone's on the same page. We used to say same way, same day in the military. So we have the mission in front of us, and everyone is working in harmony in that direction, regardless of their ethnic background. Always think about what life exposures does the person working beside you bring to the workplace, because you don't know. And once you get to know that person, maybe you'll start to understand their personality and why they think the way they do, and then interact with that and accept that or not, or come to some conclusion about our disagreements. Each organization should make a plan for training and diversity and inclusion, because as we've said, Black Lives Matter movement is not the first time we've come to this precipice point in our social interactions. So I think now is the time. There are more people on board around the world on the subject than I've ever seen in my lifetime. So this is the time to act and be a force for change. Engage your resources, those human resources that you have, put them to work, tap their abilities. We're all in this together, and just knowing that We shouldn't be divided by culture or race when we're trying to get a mission accomplished. Just think back to that Air Force statement. We're bringing people from all kinds of backgrounds, putting them together to do a job and become the best that they can be. So next step, prioritize what we talked about today. Have those one-on-ones with people that maybe even people in your organization that you don't know, you never had a conversation with. An action plan and a timeline. Timeline part is very important. So, and we want to follow through and keep our feet to the fire to move along that timeline to get to the goalpost. Communicate, have group meetings and let people know how we're doing. Have either outside or inside committees to do a self or internal ongoing review about your progress. So get that feedback and know that you're making progress and moving in the right direction. So let's see, that's all I have. Any comments, Cynthia, from the chat room?
No specific questions in the chat.
Okay. I want to close with another video here. And what time is it? Okay, we got time for it. So let me just flip over to that. I remember how to do that. Yeah, right there. Here we go. Everybody see the picture? See the screen?
Yes, yes, we do.
The world is evolving rapidly, yet we're not embracing inclusion at the same pace.
We're all different, and our differences can generate various points of view and contribute to creativity and innovation.
That's why at DuPont, we believe in embracing diverse talent, valuing each member of our team, and providing inclusive leadership. We can utilize our differences to better achieve our goals and objectives. We've made a lot of progress, yet we strive to go even further.
There are still people working in environments where they feel as though they don't belong. We cannot all contribute ideas if women only hold 20% of seats in the boardrooms of top companies globally. Unconscious bias in the workplace is just that, unconscious. It occurs before we realize and negatively shapes our assessments of people, especially when it comes to decisions such as hiring, promoting, and developing talent.
Research shows that diverse, inclusive teams are not only more innovative, they're also more engaged and creative. 35% of diverse teams outperform less diverse teams, while diverse companies are 70% more likely to capture new markets. Due to its subtlety, unconscious bias leads to unintentional exclusion. But you have the ability to influence change right now.
Open yourself up to new ways of doing things, to lead inclusively, and, for example,
mentor someone who's different from you.
Give an assignment to someone other than your normal go-to person.
When promoting, think about who's made contributions that you've overlooked.
Ask the shy or introverted employee for input during a meeting.
Get to know someone different from you by asking them to lunch.
Speak up when you hear an inappropriate or disrespectful comment said in your presence.
Don't assume the answer. Ask questions to understand points of view that are different than yours.
Monitor yourself and observe when your bias is getting in the way.
So commit to being consciously inclusive. Respect differences. Be accountable and embrace possibilities. Imagine the impact you can have.
One person.
One gesture.
One moment at a time.
Okay, I thought that was a great way for me to end the session today. And I'd like to open it up for any comments or questions.
Again, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box or unmute yourself.
Hey there.
Hey.
I just wanted to re-emphasize, because both gentlemen mentioned mentorship in some way, shape, or form, and then the video did as well. please, 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 this is a personal kind of mission of mine also. Do not discount the power of mentorship, even if it's informal mentorship. And just speaking for myself, all of my advancement in my career came by learning as I went and having leaders that were accessible to me to literally watch and sometimes shadow and mirror and then develop my own style. So please don't discount mentorship, even informal mentorship, as an absolutely viable way to help diversify and build up your workforces and your team.
That's a very good point, Innocent. All of us gets help somewhere along the line, or certainly we should.
I'd like to chime in on that, because often nonprofits will spend, many organizations spend quite a bit of money, trying to build a new building or bricks and mortar. But there's been multiple studies done, and I could share a few, that when you ask people who have been successful, what were some of the key elements or turning points or some of the things that happened to you when you were young, that were you at a crossroads, and almost like 80% or more, depending on which survey, will say it was a person, it was a mentor, it was a person in my life that made a difference. And often I think if we can save the millions of dollars of thinking we need to build a new building versus like, let's just repaint our current building and let's just spend those millions of dollars on people, resources, we would go a lot farther.
Quite true, Karen. Thank you for that.
Sapir said that, her nonprofit specifically has no workforce. It's just volunteers, which is still a workforce. And that so just to speak to these techniques specifically to a volunteer workforce, and if I can chime in, what I would say is whether you have paid staff or volunteer staff, it's still staff. And I think all of these techniques still apply. So even if people are giving their time, they're choosing to be there to help run your nonprofit. And I even if they are on paper a volunteer and not getting paid, they're still your employees, and all these techniques can still apply. Absolutely.
Well, let's go back to that one slide where we talked about here, tools that work. So you can take from this page some ideas that will work, even if it's all volunteers. Because remember, we're trying to create a like-mindedness towards a mission. And we want to feel comfortable working beside the person that we work beside or that we're integrated with. So that means some type of opportunity to a morale event, a camaraderie event where everyone comes together and gets the chance to know each other maybe on a more personal level than just the work that needs to be done. Recognizing people's successes in a group that allows them to stand out and be recognized for the exceptional work that they've done. So these are things from this page, and this PowerPoint will be available for you, so you can click on the hyperlinks and go to the different resources, etc. But that's what I would say. You have any suggestions? Anyone else?
No, I think that's good.
Melanie, did you want to unmute yourself to?
Sure. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, Milton, you talked a lot about mission and how that is a parallel between the military and NGOs, right? We're all working toward achieving a particular mission. I think one of the challenges that I've experienced in nonprofits and federal agencies and others is that people can be hyper-focused on the mission and still not treat each other well. So, use that as an excuse or a justification because they're like, well, I'm working on the mission. It doesn't, this is secondary or tertiary. So I'm sort of in this space right now of wondering in general, should we be considering inclusion, equity, inclusion, justice, social justice, depending on what angle we're coming from, in our mission statements? Should it be an intrinsic part of what every organization is saying they're working toward, even if, for example, their work is principally in like wildlife protection or art or child development, something not directly related to DEI? Just curious about how we get on that path.
Melanie, if the culture and society is going to change, this is one place that we can facilitate that change. So we're talking about when you have an organization, you want to create cultural norms. What's an acceptable behavior? What kind of language? When I was at Right Flight, we had to be careful about what clothing and T-shirt things that people would wear to work, because we were dealing with youngsters. So you have to establish rules that fit within what you're doing, but it also gives people guidance as to what's acceptable behavior to accomplish the mission and work alongside of their peers and their clients.
Thanks. That's very helpful. And the norms are, I think, really critical.
Oh yeah.
I guess I've worked in some organizations where individual staff person's identity is as sort of this like radical or counterculture sort of individual. So especially in nonprofits, I think sometimes there's a perception that it's more of a flat organization than hierarchical like the military. And so I think this is just really a generally curious question, like, and rhetorical probably, how do we supersede that and bring in those personality types to share those norms? I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, it might mean you bring in outside training or someone that can give you some pointers, that advisor type of thing. I said audit in my suggestion, but it doesn't have to be that formal. It could be interacting with your peers that have been successful. I think the Community Foundation has done a lot of work here in town on that, and they can provide maybe some guidance as to what might work for you.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like Mr. Clayton to go ahead.
Okay, but one of the things that you'll note in this new new dynamic, especially with major organizations, their mission statement now becomes inclusive. That we are doing this. This is our mission, and in order to accomplish our mission, this is what we do. So they could be separate, but also be one. So in order to do this, we have to do this. There's no way around it. And that this could be the diversity we need in order to do this. Without this diversity, we can't do this particular mission. And of course, we use the term mission, but whatever it is that you do, it cannot be done without that diversity. But in the past, that hasn't been included, whether it's, I forget the term, but whatever we do, hasn't been there. And so now organizations are using that, certainly in their advertisement, as we see, you can see with DuPont. And everybody's doing Nike, you name it. It's just popping up, just kind of like, oh my God, I didn't know they were like that, And but it's a good thing because people will know where you are and how you engage other people that's important. Because if you don't see it, then somebody needs to know. But if it's not part of the mission, then I guess you're just going to serve me rice. So doesn't matter how the plate comes out. And so that's very, very important. But it's a good point.
Well, these resources that we've highlighted in this presentation, I think if you peruse some of those, and some of them are videos, you will get a few more ideas. And
you mind if I had a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Well, we've been listening to diversity, and we're talking about inclusion, and we're talking about policy, we're talking about leadership styles, management styles. We're also talking about cultural events. What it really comes down to is an individual and their personal beliefs and what position they hold within the agency. If your leader has a personal belief that is all about being biased, it doesn't matter what policies you have in place. I mean, behaviors are going to be construed based on how they interpret those events, and that's going to filter down through throughout the organization. So you can have a bunch of policy letters with no accountability. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about, this isn't the first time that we've talked about these things. I've worked in organizations since, 1993. In fact, I was the chief of social actions for a long time. I did climate assessments. I monitored leadership in the human relations climate. And what it really comes down to is the person who was in charge, because that person has power. And not only do they have personal power, but they have institutionally backed power. So if the organization is biased against a certain race, gender, then it really doesn't matter. Like you said, at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it keeps people down there at the lower end. It doesn't matter because we're up on the hill. The folks in charge are up on the hill, and there's no reason for them to come down off of the hill because they don't have to, because they associate with the power. They're the policy makers. So what it takes, I believe, is to have a leader accountable. The leadership has to be accountable to their actions. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So the person that's at the bottom doesn't even, let's talk Air Force, a two-striper trying to talk to a general. It just doesn't happen. The person that's at the bottom of the scale, if you would, who is experiencing discrimination every single day, they're not heard. Especially if you got a supervisor who has a bias against you. So, I mean, like I said, what we're talking about is all good, and I appreciate everything we're talking about. I've taught it myself, but we need to know who and how we're going to hold people accountable if they don't believe in some of the things that we're talking about. We're all at the table because we all believe in these things, but what about the folks who don't believe in it? How do we reach those people?
Well, that certainly is a challenge, and I think part of it is education, acknowledgement that there's a different point of view. Quite a few people haven't grown up yet. They may be grown in age, but not in mindset. And unfortunately, those people get to be in charge from time to time. Now, how do you have a corporate culture that's what we're talking about with someone that's leading the entity and not on board? Well, I don't know that can happen overnight. And it may not happen until that person is removed. But unless that person is actively discouraging what we're talking about here happening in their organization under someone else's leadership, or maybe it's the group leadership, then you're not going to get to the apex. You're not going to get to where you want to be as an organization, because that person has so much power that they're just not going to let it happen. But sometimes majority can have an influence.
I'd like to respond to Mr. Pleasant on that, because I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and it goes back to, I think, what Melanie mentioned as well too. We are all in this conversation right here, right now, because we want to be.
That's right.
And if a leader in an organization leads that organization down a path that continues to display these kinds of things, then we as a community of organizations, if we define ourselves, like if we take the risk to define ourselves in our mission, in our public statements, to put our hands up and say no more, and make, regardless of what we do, if we put that into our mission statement or out there in the public saying, if you shop here, this is what you're going to get. Because that's what Nike's doing. That's the commercial we just saw. But as nonprofits, if we as a group of nonprofits start to define ourselves as much, those one-off organizations won't get the business. They won't get the grants. They will be forced to play nice and hold those leaders accountable by our group community courage. But we have to do it. That's why we're doing this whole series, is that we have, as a leader, I don't care how small your organization is, are you willing to toe the line and say no more? And if we do that as a group, those one-off that Ms. Pleasant's talking about, they'll be left behind.
Yes.
Because what foundation, what philanthropist, what retired person with a heart is going to give their $100,000 to an organization that everyone in the community knows is not willing to do this work?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's going to put themselves on a pedestal, on the microphone, like an anti-protest against what we're trying to work on? Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen. So you're absolutely right. They're still out there. But it also will take all of us to work together. So if we have a small organization of 1 or 2 staff people and a whole bunch of volunteers, if you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling like it's overwhelming, reach out to each other. Let's work together on this issue. Reach out and say, I don't know how to do this without losing people, without losing board members or funding. I don't know. Let's be courageous and work on this together, because what you just said right now, I think is huge in this conversation.
We need to be able to get attention we need to be able to get as much attention as the violence is getting.
Yes.
Right? I mean, violence is getting attention, and that's probably why it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can, like Greg said, we can sit here and talk all day about this, but unless we get a sufficient amount of attention regarding this, then it's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to require some brain power and some persistency, I think, in this movement. Because like I said, I've not seen it this worldwide in my lifetime, where we're talking about Black Lives Matter and diversity and inclusion. And it seems like this is a movement that's not going to go away right away. It's not necessarily going to be a fad unless we allow it to. So, we got to keep keeping on.
Do we have any other questions? Comments?
Mr. Pleasant, I think you're speaking, but you're on mute.
I was just saying that if somebody is a violator, then that should be publicized. Like if you have a person in a leadership position who's not following the law of the land, then that should be publicized.
Public scorn.
Often. I mean, people should know that, okay, the head of this agency has a discriminatory attitude and they're biased.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's far-fetched, but that's what it takes sometimes. They publicize other things, why not publicize that as well? I know it sounds kind of militant, but I guess I am a little bit. I mean,
no, you're not, Greg.
Clayton Moore knows me that way. He's my friend. He knows me kind of that way. So that's probably why I'm in the position I'm in, because I'm outspoken that way. But that's what it takes. If you really want radical change, you can't come with the ordinary. People don't come to see ordinary.
Yeah, but let me speak to what I know. Let's talk about the Air Force again, just for a moment. All right, we for the Air Force, just hired a 4-star general that's going to be in charge that's black. All right. He has taken over some things that were instituted before he got in his seat. And one of them was, or is, that they're having a new office on diversity at the Air Force. Now, that organization is going to be doing inspections of the entire Air Force to determine the level of diversity. Let me make sure you understand, whether it's Nike, Air Force, whoever, if you don't have that at the top, it's not going to matter anywhere else. So your leadership at the top has got to make the decision. And you're right, it's about money too. There's got to make the decision that I'm on board. And you want to hear something funny? Now, obviously, I know the colonel does too. I keep up with Air Force, with things that's going on with the Air Force. The minute that general said that I'm going to have diversity in this organization, every 4-star that's there said, I am too. All right? And that's how it works. And, you know, it works where we convince the person that's on the top that we need inclusion throughout. But if we start in the middle, if we start right there, we're not going to do anything, because it always comes down. It may be good or indifferent, but it's always at the top. If they don't make that change, it's not going to happen. And so that's why I like, you know, we can argue about Black Lives Matter, but here's one thing that is happening. Things are changing at the top, not at the bottom. You know, the athletes are getting involved, organizations are getting involved. Things that people said that we shouldn't be doing, everybody said that's a good idea, and I'm sorry I didn't do it 5 years ago when it happened. So it happens at the top. And when it happens at the top and it's part of their mission, if it's part of their mission, then it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I empathize with Greg because I worked at the same office.
Well, it may be, it may be that the Air Force leads the way again. Because we know many cultural changes were initiated by the military and the Air Force in particular.
Right.
So maybe that example is going to have to be set by the United States Air Force. Right. And then others will fall in line eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not going to happen next month.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Could it possibly be because the mission with the military is so crystal clear? I mean, it's life and death, right? And so I'm just trying to I'm trying to compassionate. That's my new word. For folks that don't have this, you know, I mean, the military's mission is so clear, you know, and but if I'm a nonprofit and I'm providing feminine hygiene supplies. This is a true conversation I had last week for homeless women, you know, and you know, how do I jump forward and have the same kind of, energy behind what we're talking about when my board is all white and my volunteers are almost all white, right? And I'm white, and how do I if I jump forward like the Air Force is doing, or other organizations that maybe have a stronger platform from which to dive off into this and change, how do I do it, Kyran? Like it's not as clear. And so I do believe in a single organization, if it doesn't start at the top, it's very hard, right?
Right.
But I also know that if people unite in that organization, like the NBA as an example, they were just like, wait, the owners at the top, haven't displayed this, right? The NFL, the owners, they didn't display this, but the players were all of a sudden like, bingo, you can't replace LeBron James, so we're just gonna walk, right? So I do believe I think it's majority, the change starts up here, but also it's in the home. When people are talking at the dinner table is where cultural change happens. Like true, sustainable cultural change happens around food, around the conversations, around relationships, all of that stuff, and leadership at the top at the same time. But how do we help those nonprofits? Because this is what we're focused on, where the mission the mission of this conversation is pretty clear. But how do we help those nonprofits where their mission doesn't align with this as clear as like the Air Force does?
Right.
I think that's when you got to get to know your people. That's when you get down to your personalities.
Yeah.
Like if I'm talking to Brother Ames, then I may want to communicate with him one way. And then because I know Cynthia likes her information a little bit different, maybe I'll communicate with her a little different. And then so on and so on. With Clay, same thing with Clayton Moore, and with you. Once I understand how you like to get your information, then I can implement my personal communication style to you and work it into a professional conversation. And that's kind of like working around the table, but you're working around the table on the job because you're getting to know your people. I mean, no organization can function without people. Right. I mean, aircraft, nobody can fly anything without the people out there. So unless you know how to communicate and get your point across or help people understand how they like to get their information and they give it to them that way, then you can better build a team and use your team members more effectively. But you got to get to know your people. You all have power. I mean, it may not be institutional power, but you have personal power. Everybody does. And so you utilize your personal power to, try to make your mission a little bit easier.
And that might be as a peon, let's say, inviting the president of your organization to lunch in order to have a conversation. Don't wait for him to invite you or him or her to invite you. Might not ever happen. But
have two people at that lunch.
Just keep asking. Just keep asking right. until they know. Yeah. They're going to try out of it. But you need a starting point to start a dialogue, and that usually requires. Somebody said food. That's one thing to get this conversation started. Socialization, that type of thing. If we ever get together again and having Christmas parties and whatever, have a conversation with the leader. Make an appointment to sit with the leader and say, I'd like to chat with you in your office about something. It's going to take courage, individual courage, for these points to be brought up and made visible.
And if you're making all the money, then you don't want to jeopardize your position or your income. And so if you're sitting in a position of power, then you're not going to jeopardize your monetary value just for a social issue because you don't have to.
You don't have
not
to.
Yet. Right. Yeah.
Greg, we I think during one of our first calls, we jokingly talked about your community task force. I think you were saying about going around and just randomly going inside of organizations. But if you guys remember, we talked about that Safe Haven program when if you were a child and you were running and you were in danger, look for this badge, right? And the utility trucks had it. So those organizations, if you see this badge, that means that organization has gone through training on how to protect you, right? So if you're ever in need, of course the police station is not everywhere, so you can go, but you can go here, you can go there, you can go here, and they used to have that badge. And we were joking around about that, why not have nonprofits on their door? We've gone, this is what we hold ourselves to, you know, and have a badge. If you want to work here, you just graduated with your PhD and you want to work here, or would you rather, and you see a badge, you know, two organizations you're deciding, one has that badge, one doesn't, right? And so just by the use of these kinds of community tools and whatnot, it will force the issue. The cat's out of the bag, the curtain has been pulled back. I don't know if it's gonna be put back. I don't know. There's like 10 chickens running around, right? And I don't know. And I do see people trying to gather them. No, wait. We like the way things were. Wait, what are you doing? You know what I mean? They're trying to gather them back, put them back in, but I think it's too late.
Yeah. Innocent, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the conversation, and I have so many thoughts, but just to the last point made, I think part of how we do this, so to speak, is, you know, Kyron speaks about the badge. I think something organizations might consider doing, and I've done this with clients, is to actually re-examine their mission statement. You know, when Melanie asked her question before about, you know, the mission is clear, but the attitudes maybe of some of the folks executing it are less than nice, right? I'm summarizing what she said. That brought me to the thought that we need to be mission driven, but values led. And one of the things that I know organizations can do, and, you know, you got to make sure that it's implemented and not just used as a badge or a sticker, so to speak, but it's to actually re-envision their mission statement as a social justice mission statement. So it's not just, we give away, you know, menstrual products for women in need. It's in order to combat, you know, gender inequalities and poverty, our organization provides menstrual products to women in need using a framework. And I'm making it sound really technical, but you spell out the values and you spell out not just the work that's getting done, right? I think the IRS has us caught up in making sure your mission statement is tight for your 501c3 application, where you clearly tell them what you do. But for us in social services, we need to be clear with our communities and our workers and our prospective workers and clients, not just what we do, but how we do it. And you know, it takes time, but I think our cultures need to become so tight around our social justice missions that you can't even get in the door if you don't align in terms of, you know, the work culture or the employees or what have you. I'm gonna stop rambling because I feel like y'all gave me so much to think about and share about. But yeah, something where you kind of reimagine your mission statement so that it more clearly, and this is done corporately, you know, it's not just the board that does it, but so that you can really restate and reframe for the world who you are, what you do, and how you do it. I think that's a major key in kind of changing the culture of organizations to include such things as diversity and whatever else they may deem as an important value.
Can I just comment on that real quick? Innocent, is that your terminology, a social justice mission statement?
No, I didn't make that up. I got that from school several years ago, where we actually had to do that for organizations we were working with, you know, whether it be case studies or not, come up with, change their mission statement into a social justice mission statement. And then it's something that I've done with clients since then. But I think it's a very useful tool, even if it never gets publicized, because you don't want to confuse people. So it's great if you can put that on your website somewhere. It's not meant to confuse folks, but it's really meant to clarify for, you know, stakeholders, the things that I just mentioned.
I absolutely like that terminology. That is great. A social justice mission statement. If that's not inclusionary, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely awesome. Social service is like what you do, and the social justice is how you do it and your intentions behind it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's almost like social services is the same thing as, or yeah, social. It's awesome. I have to noodle on that.
All right, so it sounds like we got a lot of takeaways on this one, Cynthia.
Yeah, hope someone was taking notes because I wasn't. I'll have to
Hope you
listen
remember
back
to
now.
turn the recorder on.
Yeah, no, it's recording for
Yeah,
sure.
okay.
For
Okay.
sure. All right. Well, go ahead, Milton.
I just want to say thanks for the attention and the buzz around this subject. I think the issue is, I mean, the results. The reason we're at the point we're at is long lasting, and it comes from generations and generations of conscious and unconscious thought and practices, and being bombarded by the different types of media that drives us to think in these unhealthy ways. That, you know, now I think is the time, the atmosphere is right to implement some new ways of thinking.
Yeah. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us for our final session. Like we mentioned before, this will be available on the Raise the Bar Consulting YouTube page by Friday sometime. Check back Saturday because I'm doing it. But it'll be up on that channel if you wanted to go back. And all the resources, including the PowerPoint, will also be available. We'll have a link to that, and everyone who came or who registered really will get a thank you email sometime later this week, and that will have all the links to all those resources. And our plan is to keep that resource. When you click on it, you'll see it's an entire page of resources. There's resources specifically to each session, as well as some additional resources that we've received from people in the community. So we want to keep that page up for some time. So please go back to it if, you know, as you need, and we hope it can be useful to everyone. So with that, thank you again, everyone.
And,
yep.
You know, you might also plant the seed out there if there's any ideas about follow-up to help reinforce what we've done in these last 6-7 sessions. Just put it in the suggestion box. You're going to have a questionnaire going out, right?
Yes, you will see a button to a feedback survey that we have out there. So please take some time. And I think we're going to do a follow-up email just to remind people of the survey to fill it out. So please, it shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes tops, but please fill it out. And we do leave room for suggestions on other topics that you might want to hear about for future series as well. So.
Okay, thanks everybody
All right.
for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.